All right, get ready to dive deep because today we are tackling The Metabolism Reset by Lara Bryden. This book is seriously shaking up how we think about weight and well-being. What I love is how relevant it is for so many of us, like whether we're, struggling with our weight or our energy levels or just want to understand how to work with our bodies instead of against them.
It is refreshing, isn't it? There are so many diet fads out there. It's overwhelming.
Right.
But what makes this book stand out is its focus on really understanding your own biology instead of trying to fight against it.
Exactly. And one of the most, I think, empowering messages is how it presents weight gain. Like, it frames it as a potential symptom of metabolic dysfunction rather than the root cause. I feel like that's a huge mindset shift for so many people.
Yeah, and something that I find really fascinating is how much broader metabolic health is than just, what the scale says. It really impacts everything from our risk of chronic diseases, things like heart disease and even dementia, to like our everyday energy levels and mood. It's huge.
Okay, so let's unpack this whole idea of metabolic health a bit.
Yeah.
Can we think of it like having a well-tuned engine in a car,
Yeah.
where like if our metabolism is running smoothly, everything else just kind of works better.
Exactly. And Bryden uses this, I think, really helpful analogy of a metabolic thermostat. So think of it as your body's like internal system for keeping your energy balanced, right? The problem is that modern life is constantly throwing things off.
So it's not just our own choices, but it's like the whole environment we're living in.
Exactly. It's the ultra-processed foods, the exposure to certain chemicals, even some medications. All of these things can disrupt this delicate balance. And what's remarkable is that these disruptions, they can start incredibly early in life. We're talking childhood, even prenatally. It really highlights how crucial it is to be aware of these factors.
Yeah, it makes you think about those obesogenic chemicals. I remember reading that section of the book and thinking, are you kidding me? These things are everywhere.
Right, they're everywhere.
No, it's crazy.
So obesogens are basically these external factors that interfere with our metabolism and can contribute to weight gain. And they are lurking in so many everyday products, from plastics to pesticides. And these things can disrupt our hormones, alter how our bodies store fat, even affect our appetite. It's a lot.
It's like we're fighting this uphill battle against like this inveterate enemy. No wonder so many of us struggle with our weight and energy levels and just feeling good in general. Okay, but before we spiral, let's talk about those little powerhouses we all have, mitochondria.
Ah, yes, those microscopic heroes of our cells. They're essentially our energy factories, and they are absolutely crucial for metabolic health.
Yeah, I vaguely remember learning about them in like high school biology.
Right.
But this book really brought their importance to life. So how do they actually impact our metabolism? Like, what do they do?
So mitochondria are fascinating because they can burn both fat and glucose for energy. And this is key for something called metabolic flexibility. Basically, when our mitochondria are healthy, our bodies can easily switch between those fuel sources depending on what's available.
Okay, that makes sense. So if they're not functioning optimally, our bodies might struggle to, say, burn fat as efficiently.
Exactly. And that's when we start to see signs of metabolic dysfunction. Things like weight gain, fatigue, or, even when we're trying our best to lose weight, it becomes really difficult.
So it's like having a car that can only run on like one type of fuel. It limits your options,
Yeah.
and it makes it harder to run efficiently.
That's a great analogy. And unfortunately, one of the biggest culprits behind this mitochondrial dysfunction is, you guessed it, ultra-processed foods.
Okay, let's dive into those. They get a bad rap, and for good reason, right?
Absolutely. Bryden talks about this thing called the NOVA classification, which basically categorizes foods based on how processed they are. And those ultra-processed foods, think packaged snacks, sugary drinks, fast food, they fall into that most concerning category. And it's because they're usually calorie dense, they're designed to be hyperpalatable,
Oh, yeah.
and they're often loaded with additives that don't do our bodies any favor.
It's like our taste buds have been hijacked. No wonder it's so easy to overeat them.
Right. And to make matters worse, these foods are often lacking in the nutrients that we get from, those whole foods, fruits, vegetables, lean protein, things like that.
It's kind of freaky when you really think about it. And Bryden really drives home this point, that this food environment, even though it feels normal to us now,
Right.
is actually like really new from an evolutionary perspective.
It's true. For like the vast majority of human history, we weren't surrounded by these highly engineered, hyperpalatable foods. Our bodies just aren't wired to handle them well. And to add insult to injury, we're also dealing with those obesogenic chemicals that we talked about earlier. It's like a double whammy.
It can feel kind of overwhelming, right? Like, how are we supposed to combat all of these factors that are like working against us?
Yeah. I think it's important to acknowledge that and to have compassion for ourselves in all of this because there's so much societal shame surrounding weight. But the reality is that so much of it is like truly out of our control.
Right. And that's something I really appreciate about Bryden's approach. She talks about the health at every size movement, HAES. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So HAS challenges that traditional view that a larger body automatically equals poor health. And instead, it really emphasizes like respecting and caring for our bodies regardless of size and recognizing that health is about so much more than just a number on the scale.
So it's not about striving for some like arbitrary ideal, but really focusing on well-being as a whole.
Exactly. And this includes understanding that not all fat is created equal. The book talks about subcutaneous fat, which is that fat that's just under your skin, the kind that you can like, pinch.
Yeah.
And then there's visceral fat, which is deeper, and it surrounds our organs. And it's that visceral fat that's strongly linked to a lot of the metabolic issues that we've been talking about.
And she even talks about how like bum fat, which is that subcutaneous fat around our hips and thighs, isn't inherently unhealthy, which I bet is news to a lot of people.
Right. It gets a bad rap.
Yeah.
But it's not the enemy. Now, another key concept from the book is this idea of intuitive eating, which is really about learning to tune in to your body's own hunger and fullness cues.
That reminds me of something else she talks about, signals of safety and satiety. So it's not just what we eat, but how our lifestyle choices can influence our metabolic health as well.
Yes, our bodies really thrive when they feel safe and satiated. And that's true for both, like you said, food and lifestyle.
It's a more holistic picture.
Exactly. And these signals directly impact our nervous system, which then influences our metabolism. It's all connected.
So it's less about willpower and more about creating an environment where our bodies feel nurtured and supported. That makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. And this applies to everything from like the quality of our sleep to even the strength of our relationships. For example, did you know that feeling safe and connected in our relationships actually has metabolic benefits?
Wait, really? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so it all comes down to oxytocin, which is often called the cuddle hormone.
Oh.
Right? Because it's released when we feel close to others. But what's really fascinating is that oxytocin also plays a role in regulating our metabolism.
Wow, I had no idea. There was a hormonal link between our relationships and our metabolism. So fostering close connections, that's not just about feeling good emotionally, but also about supporting our physical health.
Absolutely. And speaking of things that make us feel good, let's talk about rest and sleep. Because, if we're talking about things that can throw our metabolism out of whack, chronic stress is a big one. So making sleep a priority is like really crucial.
It's amazing, right? How something like as simple as getting enough sleep can have such a huge impact on our health. Are there any other, surprising things you learned about non-food signals of safety and satiety?
Well, this one might seem kind of obvious, but moving our bodies is super important. And I'm not just talking about, hitting the gym for hours on end or anything.
Yeah, just like finding ways to be active that you enjoy, right?
Yeah, exactly. And what's really cool is that building muscle mass isn't just about like looking toned. It actually has huge benefits for our metabolism too, because muscle is more metabolically active than fat, which means it burns more energy even when we're just relaxing.
Oh, I like that. So even if weight loss isn't your goal, like just incorporating some strength training can make a big difference in how your body's using energy.
Totally. And here's another really fascinating thing from the book. So our circadian rhythm, that internal clock that, kind of regulates so many of our bodily processes, that also plays a big role in our metabolic health.
I feel like we hear so much about circadian rhythm in terms of sleep, but I don't think I ever really put it together with metabolism as well.
It's all connected, though. Shift work, inconsistent sleep schedules, even just too much screen time before bed. All of that stuff can really mess with our natural rhythms and contribute to metabolic dysfunction.
That makes a lot of sense. So we've covered all these like broader lifestyle factors. What about like the food itself.
Hmm.
What are some of the key takeaways there in terms of dietary signals of safety and satiety?
One of the biggest ones, and I feel like Bryden returns to this again and again, is protein. And it's not just about, how much protein you're eating overall, but also really paying attention to when you're getting it too.
Especially in the morning.
Mm,
Yeah, I was
yeah.
thinking about how she was talking about one of her patients who just like completely changed her cravings just by changing what she was having for breakfast, right?
Exactly. Yeah, Lay, she was struggling with cravings and like even binge eating. And yeah, just making that one change at the beginning of the day with her breakfast made a huge difference.
Wow. It's like proof that even these small changes can be so powerful.
Totally.
So she's a big advocate for protein. She's
Yeah.
also, I know, a big advocate for eating tons of vegetables and not even just for like the vitamins and minerals, right?
Exactly. It's about more than just checking those boxes off. Vegetables are also loaded with things like fiber and prebiotics, which are crucial for a healthy gut microbiome.
And we all know how important our gut is for like basically everything, right?
Oh, it's the foundation. It's where it's at.
It is.
And another key point that she makes that I think is so interesting is about healthy fats. She talks a lot about this whole thing with the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio and how that can impact things like inflammation and insulin resistance.
That's something I've never really thought about before, to be honest. And what about saturated fat? I feel like there's
Yeah.
so much like conflicting information out there. Is it good or is it bad? What's the deal?
I know, it's so confusing, right?
It is.
But I love how Braden kind of reassures us that saturated fat isn't necessarily this like big bad villain that we often make it out to be.
Oh, good.
It's really more about the type of saturated fat you're eating, like the context matters.
So not all saturated fat is created equal.
Exactly. For example, those short and medium chain fatty acids that you find in things like butter and coconut oil, those can actually be really beneficial for our metabolic health.
That makes me feel better about all the butter I eat.
Right.
Okay, got to ask about hydration. Because it seems so simple, but I feel like it's something that most of us struggle with.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But it's so crucial, though, because water is involved in, like, literally every single metabolic process. So staying adequately hydrated is just, like, non-negotiable for supporting your metabolic health.
Noted. I'll
Yes.
drink to that.
Yes.
What about alcohol? So, I mean, it's not technically a food, but it does have calories. And I know Bryden talks about how that impacts metabolic health.
Absolutely. Yeah, and she talks about how even moderate alcohol consumption can affect our metabolism, things like our liver function and blood sugar regulation.
Okay, so it's really about moderation.
Exactly, being mindful.
Yeah.
And of course, we can't forget about sugar. It's like the ultimate frenemy of metabolic health right
It
now.
really is. It tastes so good,
Yeah.
but it's like secretly sabotaging us sometimes.
Tell me about it. And Bryden really, really stresses that we need to be so mindful of our sugar intake, especially when it comes to like all those added sugars that are hiding in processed foods.
It's so easy to overdo it without even realizing it. Okay, so we've talked about all these different aspects of metabolic health, our mitochondria, lifestyle choices, what we're eating.
Yeah.
But what happens when those signals of safety and satiety get thrown off?
That's where things can kind of start to, maybe unravel a little bit. But the good news is that Bryden gives us a really, really helpful troubleshooting guide for some of the most common metabolic obstacles that people face. And I think the biggest one, we kind of touched on it already, is chronic stress.
Yeah, everyone's stressed these days.
Mhm.
But I think a lot of people don't make that connection between stress and their physical health as well.
Oh, it's huge. It's a silent saboteur. When we're under chronic stress, it just like throws off this whole cascade of metabolic processes from hormone production to how our bodies store fat. It's intense.
So stress management isn't just about like feeling calmer, it's also about protecting our metabolic health.
Absolutely.
What are some other common things then that she sees?
Well, not surprisingly, another big one is insufficient sleep, which, often goes hand in hand with stress.
Yeah.
And it's like this vicious cycle. Stress messes with your sleep, and then poor sleep negatively impacts your metabolism, and then a messed up metabolism can lead to even more stress. Like, how do you even break free?
It's all connected. I feel like I'm really starting to appreciate how much Bryden emphasizes this like holistic approach.
It's the only way to truly get to the bottom of things.
Yeah.
And speaking of things that are all connected, we have to talk about movement, or really the lack of movement.
Right. We touched on this earlier, but I think it's worth saying it again because I feel like so many people just underestimate the power of just like moving their bodies.
Absolutely. And Bryden talks about how a sedentary lifestyle leads to decreased muscle mass, which then leads to a slower metabolism, and it just kind of snowballs from there. So finding enjoyable ways to move our bodies regularly was
Right.
so essential.
So not about forcing yourself to do workouts you hate, but finding things you enjoy.
Yes. And remember how we were talking about hydration?
It's hard to forget something so essential.
Right. Well, Bryden actually dedicates a whole section to dehydration as a metabolic obstacle. And she talks about how even being mildly dehydrated can impact our energy levels and just how well our body functions overall.
So drink up, everybody. Are there any others? Does she talk about things like food sensitivities at all?
She does, yeah. She highlights common culprits like gluten,
Mhm.
dairy, especially a type of protein called A1 casein, and then FODMAs, which are certain types of carbohydrates that can be hard to digest for some people. And food sensitivities are, I think, often overlooked,
Yeah.
but they can definitely contribute to a lot of these metabolic issues.
And I could see how it would be really hard to pinpoint that as like the underlying cause.
Exactly. And then she also talks about digestion problems like SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and how that can really wreak havoc on our metabolic health.
We're learning that a healthy gut is key.
It really is. And of course, Bryden talks about the importance of a well-functioning thyroid. She talks about how an underactive thyroid or hypothyroidism can contribute to metabolic dysfunction.
It's amazing, right? Like all of these different systems and processes that play into our metabolic health.
It's so complex. It's not just one thing, it's this whole web.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And that's, I think, why this book is so valuable because it connects all those dots and helps you understand, like, how to support your body on this deeper level.
for sure.
So we've talked about stress, sleep, lack of movement, not drinking enough water, food sensitivities, digestive issues, thyroid. Am I missing anything?
Oh, well, she also acknowledges the role that our hormones play, specifically for women, how our hormones change throughout different life stages, and that this is something that's really important for women to be aware of because those hormonal fluctuations from like puberty to menopause can really significantly impact our metabolic health.
It's like our bodies are constantly changing.
Totally. And speaking of things that can kind of throw our bodies for a loop, she doesn't shy away from talking about medications and how certain medications can sometimes impact our metabolic health too.
Oh, right. That's an important reminder. That's always worth having that conversation with your doctor about like potential side effects of any medications you might be taking.
Always.
Okay. Is there anything else? Any other like major obstacles?
There is one more that we have to talk about, and it's a big one, which is food addiction.
Yeah. It's tough because I think there's still so much like shame and stigma around that
Mhm.
topic.
So much.
How does Bryden, like, how does she approach it?
With a lot of compassion, I think, and honesty. She acknowledges just how prevalent it is, especially in, our current food environment. But she also emphasizes that it's not about, willpower or blaming yourself. It's about really understanding like the science behind it and having strategies in place to manage it effectively.
So what are some of the strategies then? What does she recommend for people who are struggling with this?
Well, she talks a lot about the importance of like abstinence from trigger foods, at least initially, to kind of help break that addictive cycle.
Right, like hitting the reset button.
Exactly. And she's also a big proponent of finding a support system, whether that's through therapy, support groups, or even just like a trusted friend or family member to confide in.
That's so important.
It can make all the difference. And then she gets really practical too. Like she actually offers specific tips for things like managing cravings and navigating those tricky social situations where, those trigger foods might be present. And she really stresses how important it is to like have a plan
Oh, yeah.
so you're not caught off guard.
Be prepared for those moments. Yeah,
Exactly.
I love that.
Uh,
Now, does she talk at all about the emotional side of it? Because it feels like it goes deeper than just like these physical cravings sometimes.
oh, absolutely. And she acknowledges that. And she talks a lot about the importance of like really finding other ways to experience pleasure and satisfaction that don't involve food. And it's not about deprivation at all. It's just about like finding other ways to nourish yourself that feel good for your body and your mind.
So it's about finding that joy and fulfillment in other areas of your life?
Exactly. And she even recommends, like, creating a new identity for yourself. Someone who is committed to breaking free from this and embracing a healthier way of life.
Ooh, I like that. Like shifting that mindset.
Yeah.
Seeing yourself as capable.
Totally. And she also acknowledges that, while she focuses a lot on working with our biology to kind of optimize our metabolic health, there are times when medical interventions might be necessary too.
Right. Like sometimes we need a little extra help.
Exactly. And she talks about things like bariatric surgery or even like GLP-1 agonist medications. But she really emphasizes that these are options that should be carefully considered with a healthcare professional.
It's not a decision to be made lightly.
Right.
And it's about finding that right approach for your individual needs.
Yes.
Does she talk about supplements at all? Because I'm always curious to hear her take on that.
Yes, she does. She talks about them and she has her like metabolic supplements combo, which includes things like magnesium, taurine, glycine, and inositol. And these are all nutrients that play such important roles in metabolic health.
Right. And I feel like they can be beneficial for so many different things.
Yeah.
From improving insulin sensitivity to reducing inflammation.
They're like the unsung heroes of metabolic health.
Yeah.
They are. Now, does she talk about things like, I know fasting and keto are kind of like hot topics in the world of metabolic health. Does she touch on those at all?
She does, and true to form, she gives a very balanced and nuanced perspective.
Okay, good.
So with fasting, she talks a lot about time-restricted eating, where you limit your eating window to a certain number of hours each day.
Right.
And she talks about how beneficial that can be for things like, regulating your hormones and improving insulin sensitivity and even promoting cellular repair.
Okay,
But she emphasizes that it should be done, gently and sustainably, not in a way that creates stress or deprivation.
It's about finding that sweet spot.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, what about keto?
Yeah, so with ketogenic diets, which are, very low carb, high fat,
Yeah.
she cautions that they're not a one size fits all.
Right, because those seem pretty intense to me.
They can be. They can be really, really effective for some people,
Yeah.
especially those who are dealing with significant insulin resistance.
Right.
But they can also be really hard to maintain, and they might not be appropriate for everyone.
It really depends on the person.
Exactly.
And I love that she really emphasizes working with a qualified healthcare professional, to figure out what's right for you, not just jumping on the latest diet bandwagon.
Always.
One thing that really stood out to me was her emphasis on being curious about our own bodies. She talks about tracking certain metrics, things like, your fasting insulin levels, your blood sugar, to kind of get a clearer picture of your metabolic health.
Totally. She even mentions using CGMs, those continuous glucose monitors. Have you heard of those?
Yeah.
They're becoming really popular now for tracking your blood sugar throughout the day.
It's like a window into your body, seeing how it's reacting to everything.
Totally. But even though those can be helpful tools for some people, she also cautions against becoming obsessive about tracking. It's about finding that balance and using these metrics as a way to learn about your body's unique patterns, not as a source of stress.
Right, because it's easy to get caught up in the numbers and lose sight of how you feel, which is really the most important thing.
For sure. And speaking of the bigger picture, I love how she encourages her readers to really advocate for themselves in their healthcare journeys as well.
Yes, she wants you to be empowered and take charge of your own health.
Totally. And that includes feeling confident and informed when you're talking to your doctor about metabolic health. And she even gives you tips for asking the right questions to make sure that you're getting the care that you need.
So it's not just blindly following your doctor's orders. It's about being an active participant in that conversation.
Exactly.
Okay, so before we move on to the final part of our deep dive here, can we circle back to that core message that we talked about at the beginning about how weight gain is often a symptom of metabolic dysfunction, not necessarily the cause?
Yes. It's such a powerful shift.
It is.
And I really think it has the potential to change the way we view our bodies and approach our health.
It takes away some of that blame and shame.
So much of it.
And allows for this more compassionate and empowering approach, I think.
Totally. And it helps us to remember that there are so many factors that contribute to metabolic health. Everything from our genetics to our environment to our lifestyle choices, it's not just one thing.
Right. And it's not about finding that quick fix, but making sustainable changes that really support our bodies in the long run.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So just to recap, we've talked about how metabolic health is about so much more than just like the number on the scale.
Yeah.
Right? It's about understanding all of these amazing processes that are happening within our bodies and the signals they send and how to support them. We explored all those different lifestyle factors, what we're eating. We've talked about some of those obstacles that get in the way. Now I'm kind of curious to hear, like, what can we actually do? What are some things that we can implement in our lives?
Yeah, me too. Because she gets into all of that. She really gives us a plan for putting all of this into practice.
Let's save all that good stuff for the final part of our deep dive. All right, let's talk strategy. We've covered what metabolic health is and all the things that impact it, but now I want to know what we can do about it day to day.
Right. That's the exciting part. And Bryden really delivers. She moves beyond just the theory and gets into like actionable steps we can take to make real change.
Love it. Where do we even begin?
Well, she starts with something that can be surprisingly tough,
Right.
which is letting go of some of those really ingrained food habits. Specifically, she talks about those like packaged bread and those, dessert type foods.
Oh, yes. It's like they're everywhere, those things.
They are.
And they feel so primal, like they're hardwired into our DNA or something.
Well, and she actually talks about how, in a lot of ways, they are. She talks about this guy, Dr. Bruce Lipton, who talks about how we download these perceptions about food in childhood.
Interesting.
Like even before we've developed like those critical thinking skills.
Wow.
So it's not even just about like breaking a habit. It's about challenging these really deep-seated beliefs.
That's really powerful. So we're up against years of like conditioning and cultural like influence.
Yeah.
It makes sense that it's so hard to make these changes stick.
Absolutely. And she uses this great analogy. She compares it to like switching from a paved footpath to a path that's like overgrown in the forest.
Okay.
So at first, that overgrown path, it's kind of exciting, right? Like it feels full of possibility. But then those old cravings start to kick in. Those familiar paths beckon you back.
Yeah, and you just want what's easy. It's easy to default back.
Exactly. And that's where, like, I think a lot of diets fail. But here's the thing. Bryden reminds us that creating lasting change is a process. Like, it takes time and it takes consistency. And she even cites research suggesting that on average, it takes like 66 days to really form a new habit.
Okay, so it's not about being perfect. It's about being consistent.
Yes, it's about getting back on that overgrown path again and again until it like becomes your new normal.
I love that. It's a much better visual than like willpower and deprivation, which is what we usually think about.
Totally. So remember how we talked earlier about time-restricted eating?
Mhm.
She comes back to that as a really helpful tool for this, for managing those cravings and just like making it easier to make those healthier choices.
Yeah. Tell me more about that. I'm really interested in this whole concept. So it's not about like restricting calories or certain food groups, but more about just establishing a consistent eating window.
Exactly. And she talks about how like that overnight fast can actually be really good for our bodies. It allows those systems to kind of reset and recharge, and it can help regulate our hormones, improve insulin sensitivity, and it even promotes like cellular repair, which is pretty amazing.
Wow. So you're giving your body this break from digesting to like focus on all these other important things.
Exactly.
Now, I know some people are hesitant because they're worried about fasting, like increasing stress hormones. Does she address that at all?
She does, yeah, and it's a valid concern. But she reassures us that when you approach it gently and sustainably, time-restricted eating shouldn't cause a surge in stress hormones. She just really stresses making sure that you're getting enough protein during your eating window. And of course, always honoring your hunger cues.
Yeah, listen to your body.
Always, always, always.
So it's like finding that sweet spot where you're like giving your body that break without feeling like you're depriving yourself.
Yes. And in terms of like what to actually eat during your eating windows, we talked about protein, but she gets into how to really make it like a delicious part of your routine.
I noticed that she had all those high protein breakfast recipes. I was like very into that section of the book.
Tea too. That was my favorite part.
It was very helpful, especially if you're like busy in the mornings, which who isn't?
Totally. And there are so many creative and convenient options like protein smoothies or egg muffins or even just having leftovers for breakfast.
Okay, I like it. What about carbs, though? I feel like carbs are always a source of confusion.
I know, right? But Bryden sets the record straight and she's like, listen, carbs have gotten a bad rap, but not all carbs are created equal. She's all about those whole unprocessed carbs that you're getting from like fruits, vegetables, legumes.
So choosing carbs that, like, nourish our bodies.
Exactly. And for those who might be sensitive to like wheat or gluten, she talks about exploring things like rice, potatoes, gluten-free grains, things like that.
So finding what works for you. That's the theme here, I think.
It is. And she says that throughout the book, like be realistic, don't try to do something that you're not going to be able to stick with.
Find something you can do long-term. Sustainable.
Exactly.
Okay, I love that.
Right.
Now, of course, we always try to get our nutrients from whole foods, but she acknowledges that sometimes we need a little extra support.
Supplements.
Yes. So she talks about those. I love how she reiterates that, like, supplements shouldn't replace a healthy diet. It's about adding to it.
Totally.
So she talks about her, metabolic supplements combo.
Yes.
The magnesium, taurine, glycine, and inositol.
The Fab Four. And she has like really clear guidance in there too on dosage and things like that. And just like how to choose like high quality supplements, which is really important.
Okay, so we've talked about what we eat, how to manage cravings, ways to time our meals. But what about all that other stuff like stress and, all the other lifestyle factors that we were talking about before?
Right, because it's not just about food, it's about creating that like supportive environment for our overall well-being.
Yeah. She talks about, managing stress, getting enough sleep, having those like loving relationships. It's so important, but it's so easy to overlook when you're just focused on like diet and exercise.
Totally. And she even talks about connecting with nature more, which I thought was really interesting.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, whether that's like going for walks in the park, gardening, just spending time outdoors.
It's so good for you.
It helps us to like reconnect with those natural rhythms and kind of like de-stress from modern life. So she gives us this like incredible roadmap for understanding and supporting our metabolic health.
Yeah,
But she also reminds us that like this is a journey, right?
totally.
It's not a destination and we're going to like hit bumps in the road. Oh, absolutely. There are going to be setbacks and challenges. It's part of it. But the most important thing is to just be kind to yourself through the process. Learn from your mistakes and just keep going.
And celebrate all those wins, no matter how small they might seem.
Yes, every step is a victory.
I love that. Well, she leaves us with this really powerful question, which I think is a perfect place to wrap up. If our bodies are hardwired to seek safety and satiety, what messages are you currently sending yours through your lifestyle and food choices?
So good, right? It really makes you think.
It does. It makes you like pause and reflect.
It challenges us to be more mindful.
Yeah, and just more aware of like what our bodies are craving on that like deeper level.
For sure.
Well, on that note, that wraps up our deep dive into the Metabolism Reset. We hope you enjoyed it and that you learned a lot and feel empowered to take charge of your metabolic health. Definitely check out the book if you want to dive deeper into any of these topics. Until next time, be well.